Hey everyone, welcome to Workforce Gaming. I'm Brad, here to talk about Tales of Kenzera Zao. This is the new Metroidvania that got a free release on PlayStation Plus this past week. It had a big reveal at the Game Awards about 6 months ago, and I think that's kind of why it stuck in my brain as one of those games to kind of keep an eye on. The introduction that it had there is really what sets it apart. So at the Game Awards, the creator of the game came out and talked about how his father had passed away and he wanted to make a game that kind of spoke to that and spoke about death. And that's really what this game is about. If you know the Metroidvania's genre, it's a pretty straightforward take on that. And the story is really where the interesting pieces of this lie. Quick Metroidvania, if you're not quite sure what I'm talking about, you're basically 2D, side-scrolling, exploring, finding different paths, finding shortcuts, checking a map a lot, lots of upgrades, power-ups, that sort of thing. So this game kind of hits all of those. I don't think that's necessarily the interesting part, and I think that's actually where the game struggles a little bit. But what I really want to talk about and start with is kind of the thing that stood out to me. I think the thing that kind of kept me driving forward in this, which is the story and the overall setting and feel of this game. So from the very beginning, the entire game is about the death of your character's father. Now, it's kind of framed a little bit differently because you initially start in this futuristic-looking apartment, and your father has just died, and your mom gives you this book that your dad had been writing right before he passed away. So you open up the book, and what you're actually doing is you're playing this character that your father was writing about a son having to deal with the death of his father. So it's kind of got that layer to it, a little bit of seeing the thought of death from the person who just died in your life as you're going through this. So very neat perspective, very interesting way that it's kind of told through that. But the story that you're playing through, and really it's just kind of bookended by the real life character, but it's all encompassing this death theme and this how we deal with death. That's really interesting. So basically you show up and your character shows up in this world and your dad died and you go, I need to get him back. So you make a deal with the god of death that he'll bring your dad back if you can prove that you are worthy of it by going out and defeating the three great spirits. And if you do that, you've proved your worthiness, and we can talk about going and bringing your dad back to life. Again, if you know Metroidvanias, they're fairly straightforward story-wise. There's no really crazy twists and turns, nothing hugely unexpected here, but just the constant theme of this character dealing with this loss is really where you get a lot of emotion here, and you can kind of tell that this is something that the creator of the game is really dealing with and is really kind of working through and making this game. And it shows, because it is a really emotional game. Each one of the great spirits has some kind of death associated with it. And you're able to see from this kind of naive character who really is just going like, my dad died, I want him back, the end. I'm going to do what I need to do to get there. You see how some of these other characters are handling it, and you're kind of presented with, well, here's how one person thinks about it, and here's how another person thinks about it. And it's very interesting just to see those different perspectives and see how you're, just headstrong, no, we're going to bring it back. Character deals with it. Each of the kind of the side characters you run into handles it a little bit different. There's some that are kind of accepting of it and talking about it as part of life, and there's other that are, super resistant to it. There's one where it's just, accepting it, and just it all plays really well. The dialogue is very well done. It's voiced really well. Everything about it in this fashion is just so well done, and I think just does a really good job of presenting something that I think could be really hard to deal with for a lot of people if you've experienced it, or if you haven't experienced it. It really does put you in the shoes of these people and understand what's going on and all the thoughts that are running through their head. Again, outside of that, it really is just going through great spirit. We're at the end of the game, basically. A little bit of playing around with it here and there, but it's fairly straightforward in the linear story narrative perspective. It really is just those moment-to-moment scenes, those interesting ways of talking about this and handling this really touchy subject that I think sets the game up in a really good way and a really good perspective on it. So where I think the game starts to falter, I kind of mentioned this off the top. The combat in this game is fine. And I think that's kind of... I actually texted Doug that the story in this deserved a better game. I think it's one of those things where you can see kind of a first-time developer that we don't necessarily have the resources to make this grand thing that we have envisioned, but you know what? I'm going to do this one thing really well. And I think a lot of people talk about them. They talk about like a 7 out of 10 game, not to put scores on anything, but a 7 out of 10 game does one thing really, really well. And I think this game kind of embodies that thought of, here is our thing. Our thing is the story. You can say what you want about the rest of the game, but the story is incredible. It's fantastic. The narrative, the writing, all that, great. But because of that, again, and maybe this has to go with, first time development, indie studio, it is an EA original, so I don't know how much support they get for those types of things. But the rest of it, I think, just kind of sums up with, is fine. Metroidvanias, especially nowadays, are kind of a dime a dozen. They're all over. There's a lot of them. It takes a lot to really stand out and be unique, I think. And again, this one chose the story as our thing, the feel, the vibe as our thing. So combat is basically just, what you would picture. It's 2 styles, which is cool. You've got the sun and the moon style. One style is very much your power melee. The other is your ranged attacks. Both have skill trees. There's a super move for each. Again, kind of all the things you would expect in this. Nothing super complicated, nothing overly complex. The combat feels fine. It flows nicely. There's some pieces where you get zoomed out a little bit further, made it a little bit touchy for me just to kind of see what was going on. And the moves are very flashy. It's very well animated. It does look very, very good. It is a very pretty game. But some of that extra animation and extra kind of effects around your character sometimes made me kind of get lost into, okay, where am I in the combo? How close am I? Those types of things come up a little bit. There also are not that many enemy types. It feels like there's maybe 8 to 15 total in this game. It's not a long game, 8 to 10 hours maybe, but bosses, I'm going to kind of keep on back to that standard Metroidvania feel. You got your smash stage, your one little 20-foot bar kind of floating around. The boss is kind of floating around you. You're jumping and smacking it. You're shooting at it. Basically, all of the bosses fit into that category pretty quick and easy. That's most of them. The one thing I will say, and this drives me crazy in games like this, the hardest part in this game is not the bosses. It is when we put together a large, weird assembly of enemies in a weird arena. So the game has lots of spikes and one-hit kill things and like that for platforming, which works pretty well for platforming, but it starts putting that into combat towards the later stages. And especially when you start mixing it in with a couple of the enemy types, some enemies will have certain types of shield where one of your 2 styles will work better on them. So you really have to use that style. So by the time you're looking at avoiding one-hit kills, looking at this weird group of enemies, managing which style you're using, and have some of the zoomed-out combat, like I said, it's hard in that sense. It's difficult in that sense. And those are some of the most difficult pieces where it's just the thing you assembled is difficult. If you took one piece away, I could do it. The bosses, not that difficult. But those weird groupings of enemies, those weird setups, I don't like when that's the tough part. Because it just kind of feels like, okay, in order to actually test me in this, you didn't create an enemy that's going to test me. You didn't make a boss that's going to test me. You didn't, kind of give me, okay, well, what if we just pair these 2 together? You went, no, here's 8 of these weird things, some one-hit kill points, and we're going to zoom it way out so everything looks a little fuzzy to you. And that's what's going to make it difficult. It's just, I feel like there's better ways to do difficulty than that. So that frustrated me a little bit as well. Another big piece of Metroidvanias is always your exploration. Really nice map. The map lays out things really well, which is nice. You get an objective marker for where to go. There's little secrets here. Not a ton of collectibles. Definitely, I like to use the term manageable when I talk about collectibles. It's definitely manageable if you want 100% this. It didn't feel like I did not, but it didn't feel like it was going to be something that's going to triple your game length to do it. It felt like, okay, if I sat down for another 4 or 5 hours, I could probably knock all these things off the list here just because you can very clearly see where most of the kind of hidden paths are on the map already. Your exploring upgrades, kind of standard affair again. You get your grappling hook, you get your dashes, you get all those things that you would expect in a Metroidvania. There's really nothing that is that unique power that is specific to our character. It's all very just, yep, time to get the grappling hook. Yep, time to get the dash. Yep, time to get the thing to break through walls. Yep. Check. And again, if you played a lot of these, you can kind of see this coming just with the things that are put in your path where it's like, okay, can't jump that high. Gonna need my grappling hook. Oop, that wall looks breakable. None of my powers are doing it. Probably gonna get that later. Overall, I really feel like this is just kind of a fine Metroidvania, but I do feel like that story does does do a lot of heavy lifting in this in my appreciation of the game. I think that alone is a unique take. It's interesting to see a game that's not kind of in that quote-unquote walking simulator genre handling a subject like this, which I think is very cool. I like the idea of being able to take different genres of games and still be able to explore something deep and emotional without it having to be me walking around an old abandoned house discovering books and letters or, whatever else you can kind of picture in that style of game. No hate on those games. I love those games a lot, but I like the idea of, okay, what if we did a 2D Metroidvania and still got that same message across? I think that's one of those things that's kind of cool for video games as a whole, to be able to take traditional game styles and be able to have a message like that. And I don't think you see that quite as much. You see it here and there with different things. Spec Ops The Line always comes to my brain when I think of some game kind of doing something similar to this, where it's, okay, it is a crazy first-person shooter, but we're dealing with kind of the horrors of what's going on in this situation. Similar with this, where it's like, okay, it is a Metroidvania, but we're going to deal with this really tricky subject of the passing of a loved one. So I think if you know what you're getting yourself into in a Metroidvania, you're okay with that genre, you like that genre, I think there's enough here for you. If you're looking for something that's like the next great Symphony of the Night, Metroid Dread, whatever you want to go with for your Metroidvania Hall of Fames, I don't think this is going to get there, but I think it's a solid game that really is elevated by its story and its setting and its overall tone. We are Workforce Gaming. You can leave a comment below, subscribe to our channel. There's a link to support us on Coffee as well. See you later.